Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and today's card is actually a Pinterest inspired card. I will have the Pinterest inspiration on my blog, which will be linked directly below the video. So I'm going off of that creation. It wasn't even a card, and I took it quite literally. So I've got my Tim Holtz. This is the flower garden stamp set that I've had for, again, I think I've had this set for over a year and haven't used it. And then I've got some Strathmore ready cut watercolor paper, which is already pre-cut to 5x7. And I have that laying out, and I was going to stamp these flower images, but because it's 5x7 and my cards are 99% of the time A2 sized, I find this size a little bit overwhelming to work with because it's just, even though it's not that big, for me, it just seems quite big. So I grabbed the largest die from the My Favorite Things Blueprints 2 Dynamics, and I just use that as kind of a visual guide so that I'm stamping these images somewhat contained within that, because I am going to use that die to die cut this when I'm done coloring it all in. So I wanted to make sure that I didn't completely, end up with a bunch of empty space where there's supposed to be an image. And with this stamp set, there's a couple different stem options. And this long one I really like because you can manipulate it. It's naturally curved, but because it's so long and skinny, you can easily manipulate it to pretty much go in whatever direction you want. So that's what I did, is I stamped it as it was for the first flower on the left, and then I manipulated it a bit before I stamped it on the right. And I stamped the images with versafine onyx black ink. And then I taped down this watercolor paper onto my masonite board just to keep it flat, because I do plan on adding a fair bit of water to this. Plus, it's just easier to work with when it's taped down. Now, for the watercoloring, I'm using my Gansai Tambi watercolors. And funny thing is I'm using a lot of the colors that I had pre-mixed and used on that Tim Holtz Crazy Birds card, the Easter egg style one. So that's the same pink and some of the same green. And yeah, there was still quite a bit left on my palette here, so it was just easier to pick up the colors and go with it. And I am doing really messy watercoloring on purpose. I had seen someone do something similar. I'm pretty sure. It escapes me. But I wanted the colors to bleed out of the edges. I wanted it to be messy. I was experimenting. This isn't something I normally would do intentionally. It's usually, it just happens accidentally because I don't let things dry. But I was like, you know what? I want to do that. And I was also experimenting because that's something I still, I haven't had much experience with. But the more I do it with watercoloring, the more I try things and experiment, is layering color. Usually I just, put the color on and go. But I wanted to try layering. So I did, that first kind of messy layer, and I hand painted in the leaves just because I could, let it all dry, and then went in and did a second layer. And down the road, I ended up doing even a third layer, and it's fun. I just kind of did this as I had time. I just had left it sitting on my desk, and then I went and fed my kids supper, and then I'd come back to it and do a little bit. And thankfully, for the most part, remember to turn on my camera each time I did this, because this is one of those things too where you work on it, you let it dry, do its thing, you come back, and you just keep playing with it. And at times, it really doesn't look that great, but I totally encourage people to experiment and do it all the way until it's done, because sometimes it's surprising when you're like, it just looks like crap. And then, you come back to it later after it's dried, or you've, gone and done something else, and it just looks completely different. So I painted everything in, and then for the background, I just mixed up a bit of blue, and I used a lot of water for it because I wanted it to be it was still a lot brighter than I intended, but I went with it. It worked. It was still wet, and while it was still wet, I went in and added another layer of pink to the flowers. I knew this was going to happen, so just FYI, because around the edges was wet, there you can see the colors just bleeding out, and I wanted it to do that. So again, if you don't want that sort of a look, you have to make sure everything's dry before you add any more color, because yeah, you can see the pink is just totally bleeding out into the blue, but I wanted that to happen and just kind of let it do its thing. So then I went in and added a bit more green to the leaves and the stems, and those didn't bleed out as much because those areas were already dry. I kind of hoped they were still damp, but they weren't. But again, I'm just letting everything just kind of do its thing. So once I had done that, though, I picked up more of the green and I just splattered it onto the background. I just picked up with a brush and then hit the brush against my fingers to splatter everything. And then this part, I wanted everything was completely dry. And then I mixed up yellow right on the watercolor pan because I wanted it pretty much full strength to paint the little stamens of the flower there. And I just used my smaller brush. My other brush I was using was the silver size 4 brush I did everything with. And then for this little part, I just used my silver size 2 brush. I was raving about these brushes in another video. I'm really happy with them. So as a last step, I mixed some Copic opaque white. I showed the jar of it that I'd got in a haul video quite a while ago, a month or two ago. It is super, super opaque. So I mixed up a little bit of that with water just to thin it out a bit, and then picked it up with my brush and splattered that onto the background. And then I had to let that dry for quite a while. I forget how long. I set it aside and worked on something else. So once it was dry, I ran it through my Big Shot with that same large die from the Blueprints 2 Dynamics. Then I die cut some white cardstock using the Garden Fence Dynamics from My Favorite Things. And I'm just adding some multi-medium matte adhesive to it, just to the areas that are actually going to get adhered. And then press that down and it's adhered. And then I flip it over and I grabbed my scissors and I just cut off the parts that were hanging over the edge. And then I grabbed some AmyR. This is a 3/8 inch green check. It's just a gorgeous gingham ribbon. This is another oldie but goodie favorite from AmyR, which is still available. All these ribbons that I've been using in my videos are still available. I always link to them on the ribbon resource site, which is AmyR's retail site. And obviously, like, I have a ton of it. I have full rolls of a lot of their ribbons, and I've had them for years. I just love them. So I wrapped that around, tied it in a bow, and then I adhered that panel to my card base, which was just heavyweight white cardstock, and I used foam tape for that. And then just to finish off the inside, because you guys know I always have to finish off the insides, I'm inking up those same stamps with just a couple of My Favorite Things dye ink. I used ripe raspberry and sour apple, and I just stamped them off once onto the scratch paper before stamping them onto the inside of the card, so they're not quite as intense. And that finished off the card. So no sentiments for it. I wanted this to be completely open-ended, any occasion sort of a thing. And that was it. So thank you all so much for watching. There'll be a link below the video to my blog post. There'll be links to all the supplies used, as well as in my blog post, the inspiration picture. So check it out if you're interested. And I will see you all in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.